be to Vice President Kamala Harris and to the White House? What do you have to say to them? I mean, she's spent time on, these shows, podcasts. You haven't seen the response. I know I've been up to Chimney Rock. I've never seen such devastation in my life. It looks like a war zone. I know people lost their life up there as well. What would your message be to her in the White House? Sean would like to know.
Where are you? Where are you? These people have lost their homes, they've lost their businesses, they've lost everything, and they need some support. They need help. And $750 is not much help.
While the news distracts you with misinformation, tragedy strikes Appalachia. Before we get to that, it seems impossible, almost impossible to imagine. But here we are, barely 2 weeks after Hurricane Helene ravaged the southeast. And now we're staring down the barrel of Hurricane Milton, a Category 5 storm with winds up to 180 miles per hour. It's heading straight for Disney World. Florida is preparing for the worst as mandatory evacuations are underway, especially on the West Coast. The power of nature reminds us how fragile life can be, and it's imperative that those in the storm's path prioritize safety and evacuate. But here's where the government gets it right for a change. The North Carolina Board of Election here in my home state right now, North Carolina, unanimously approved emergency changes to voting access in the 13 hardest hit counties. They've assured that early voting and election day polling locations are still accessible despite the devastation left by Helene. This move highlights the importance of keeping our democratic process or republic process alive, even in the face of natural disasters. Yet the underlying concern of 58% of Americans remains anxious about voter fraud. It shows that we still have trust issues to tackle. I think it's time for us to go right. Hi folks, Peter Boykin here with #GoRight. Before we dive into today's eye-opening story and a few other little tag-along articles, let me tell you a quick one. Back in the 1930s, during the height of the Great Depression, a small Texas town was hit by a terrible flood. Homes destroyed, lives upended. But what did the people do? They didn't wait for the government handouts. They pulled together, rebuilt from the ground up, and by God, they stood strong. Today, our Appalachian communities are facing a different kind of flood, this time not just from water, but from our own government. Let's talk about what's going on right now in Western North Carolina and why this isn't just a local story, but a warning to every American citizen. So welcome, Patriots. This is another episode of #GoRight with Peter Boykin, where we dig into the stories the mainstream media would rather you ignore. I want to kick this off of a quick story, a lesson from the playground, if you will. When a bully is afraid of getting caught, they point the finger elsewhere, hoping the teacher won't notice their mischief. Our government, or should I say our constitutional republic, seems to be playing that same game with, quote, misinformation. But the truth is simple, folks. When the government or media tells you what to think, it's time to start asking questions. Now let's dive into something they definitely don't want you to focus on. What's happening in the mountains of Appalachia. You might not hear this on your nightly news, but something evil is lurking in the North Carolina mountains, and it's being compounded by incompetence, or worse, intentional neglect from the very government sworn to protect its citizens. Murder always happens for a reason. That's a hard truth, but a truth nonetheless. And in the mountains of Appalachia, it's becoming clear that neglect can be just as deadly as any weapon. The devastation left by Hurricane Helene has exposed more than just broken buildings and flooded homes. It's exposed the broken promises of a government more concerned with optics than with helping its people. Just imagine over 1 million people in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee have been left to fend for themselves. Children are wandering in the mud, lost and alone, while bodies hang from trees or float down rivers. It's a scene out of a nightmare, and yet help has been almost non-existent. Where is FEMA? Where are the federal and state authorities? The fact is, they're missing in action, just as they were during the crisis in Lahaina, Maui. Now, I know folks, they'll get online and they'll say, quit spreading misinformation. They're getting help. Oh, the news is telling you that we're spreading misinformation. Well, I, for one, don't like the spread of misinformation. But I do like the spread of information that people can learn. And I have been reaching out to a lot of individuals online from different points, watching videos on YouTube and TikTok from people at the source, anything they can get out. And I'm learning it on my own, not from conspiracy videos, not from the news that tells you to look the other way, but a snapshot of multiple things going on. That's why I usually delay my news by just a little bit, because I want a snapshot of the whole picture and then give it to you. Now, here's the reality, folks. While FEMA is too busy at the southern border, they've left these American citizens to rot. Literally. Volunteers, not government officials, are stepping up to bring the dead to Mission Hospital in Asheville, which has not been turned into a makeshift morgue. Reports of over 900 bodies have surfaced. 900 in FEMA. They won't even send in the refrigerator trucks to store them. Now think about that. FEMA is distributing porta potties while citizens starve, while they die of dehydration, and while the bodies pile up. This is nothing short of mass murder by negligence. And as if to twist the knife, there are rumors that the federal government is planning to bulldoze entire areas, bodies, and all without even identifying the victims. Quote, something evil is going on in the NC Mountains, as one local pastor put it. Now, let me give you an opinion. This is an opinion warning. Now, this next part may sound like speculation, but ask yourself, who stands to gain? Columnist Leo Hallman reminds us that this region is Trump country. Are these citizens being deliberately ignored to suppress voter turnout in 2024? It's hard to say for sure. But when illegal immigrants receive $2,200 a month from FEMA, while these hurricane victims get $750 in one-time aid, like quick aid, you have to start questioning the priorities of this administration. And I know I just talked about how our North Carolina government has opened up and convinced people that they're going to be able to vote, and they're going to be able to do early voting, and they're going to vote the day of the election. And I know that both sides have decided that, both Republicans and Democrats. But how's that going to affect this election? It opens up a whole can of worms on fraud, voter fraud. And North Carolina is a very important state. Meanwhile, we have an infrastructure crisis, and that's not all. The regional electrical grid is a mess. With over 360 substations down, there's a transformer shortage. Folks, and you'll never guess why. In January of this year, 2 high-voltage power transformers were shipped off to Ukraine, leaving the U.S. grid vulnerable. Now, Western North Carolina is without the backup it desperately needs to restore power. We're not putting America first. We're worried about everybody else. Now, let's be real. We used to be a country that knew how to rescue its own. When disaster struck, America's rallies together, government, military, and civilians alike. But today, we're seeing a government that is more focused on foreign aid than on saving its own citizens. Whether it's deliberate or just gross incompetence, or both, the result is the same. Lives are being lost. So while the media and government continue to distract you with the claims of, quote, misinformation, keep your eyes on the real story, the one that's playing out in the mountains of Appalachia. People are dying, and our constitutional republic is failing them. But we won't be silent. We will continue to shine a light on those atrocities and hold the powers that be accountable. Remember, patriots, it's our duty to speak the truth, even when they tell us not to. They tell us to shush. Don't spread misinformation. Don't talk about it. Be afraid. Go after people. Tell them that they're spreading misinformation. Meanwhile, Americans know what to do when disaster strikes. Let me take you back a bit. When I was young, I remember being told that people didn't wait around for the government aid. They rolled up their sleeves, they worked together, and they rebuilt their community from the ground up. And that's the American spirit: resilience, self-reliance, and unity in the face of disaster. But today, we're seeing something very different happening in our constitutional republic. Our communities are under threat, not just from national disasters, but from the actions of those in power who want to use these disasters to reshape our country. Now let's dive in. All right, folks, we're not talking about just another disaster here. We're talking about Hurricane Helene, which ravaged western North Carolina. Now, in the past, when disaster struck, we knew what to do. Communities came together, we rallied the troops, we got to work rebuilding and restoring. But now rescue seems far away because the response isn't what it used to be. There's an agenda at play, and it's bigger than you might think. So where's the rescue? In the past, rescue was immediate. The Red Cross, local fire departments, volunteers, everyone pitched in. But this isn't your grandfather's rescue operation anymore. So why the change? Why are we seeing delays, negligence, and outright abandonment of affected communities? Well, if one infamous line comes to mind, quote, never let a serious crisis go to waste. A phrase coined by Rahm Emanuel, who served as President Obama's chief of staff. It's a chilling reminder of how crises are now used as opportunities for political and economic gain, especially in a presidential season. The truth is, in the wake of disasters like Helene, powerful interests see opportunity. Again, another opinion warning. Now, this is where it gets political, and in my opinion, the elites are using this crisis to push people out of these areas. And they're making room for their bigger plans. What do they gain? Well, a lot, as we're about to see. And I'll repeat some of this. We got to get the point out there. The lithium gold rush. Let's talk about lithium. Yes, lithium. The stuff that powers everything from your smartphone to your electric vehicle. Turns out Western North Carolina is home to some of the richest lithium deposits in the world. 2 major lithium mines are located right there in the Appalachian Mountains, Albemarle Kings Mountain and Piedmont Lithium. Albemarle's Kings Mountain site is one of the world's most advanced lithium operation, describing itself as a lithium ecosystem. And guess who just invested $90 million into that operation? The Department of Defense. That's right. Our federal government is getting in on the action, claiming it's all about national security and increasing domestic lithium production for the battery supply chain. But wait, folks. There's more. The largest investment firm in the world, BlackRock, recently bought 2 million shares in Albemarle Corporation just before Hurricane Helene hit. Coincidence? I don't think so. There's a bigger game being played here. Piedmont Lithium, another player in the region, has faced opposition from local residents. But now, after Hurricane Helene, that opposition seems to have been conveniently swept away, just like the homes and the properties of the locals. Now, Piedmont can push forward with their expansion plans, all under the guise of recovery and national security. Now, let's jump to quartz, a national strategic asset. It's not just lithium. these elites are after. In Western North Carolina alone, it's also home to some of the world's purest quartz, a critical component in semiconductor chips that power everything from smartphones to medical devices. 2 quartz mines in Spruce Pine, North Carolina produce up to 90% of the world's high purity quartz. And these quartz mines are considered national strategic assets. And with the hurricane displacing specialized workers, there's now an even greater push to get these mines up and running again. But at what cost to the people living there? And here's another twist. There's another quartz company, Gusher Knob, that's ready to capitalize on this disaster. They've been deploying partnerships to expand their operations, and now, with the local population displaced, their business is likely to pick up rapidly. Which moves on to seizing private lands, the power of eminent domain. I mean, that's kind of what happened to the Biltmore Institute or mansion. Let's get into something that should concern every property owner in America, eminent domain. This legal power allows the federal government to seize private property for public use, supposedly for fair compensation. But in cases like this, we know the truth. The government seizes land, and the locals are left with little choice but to comply. Resistance is futile. You must comply. We've seen this happen before, from expanding highways to creating parks, but now it's being used to displace entire communities. Communities that have been devastated by Hurricane Helene. The elites are swooping in, seizing lands under the guise of recovery and using them for their own profit. Whether it's for lithium, quartz, or some other smart city initiative, as being rumored for Asheville. So Asheville, the next smart city? Asheville, the largest town in the region, has suffered extensive damage. But here's the thing, there's been talk for years about turning Asheville into a smart city. A futuristic vision where technology is used to monitor and control every aspect of urban life. And now with the damage from Helene, the opportunity is ripe to implement those plans. Coincidence again? A lot of people, and I don't think so. Now let's move on to the UN's global agenda because it's targeted Appalachia. The International Institute for Sustainability, IIS, a Brazilian-based nonprofit that works hand in hand with the UN, is developing something called the Nature Map Explorer. Now this tool doesn't just track random trees or wildlife, it's mapping out human impact, biomass carbon density, species richness, and this is the kicker, areas of global significance for conservation. But you want to know one of the prime spots they're targeting for this, quote, conservation? Western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee. That's right, the same region hit by Hurricane Helene. And where communities are being left to fend for themselves as properties are being quietly condemned. Look, I've heard the rumors. I've talked to people in Chimney Rock and nearby areas. They're saying there's a land grab going on a sneaky, underhanded seizure of property under the guise of eminent domain and environmentalism. Which leads us to the global agenda and the UN's 2030 and 2050 goals. Now, here's the kicker, folks. The destruction of these communities, the seizure of their land, the push for smart cities, it's all part of a larger globalist agenda. I'm not InfoWars or anything like that. The globalists. But we're going to use the language. The United Nations has set its sights on the 2030 and 2050 goals, pushing for sustainability and biodiversity under the guise of environmentalism. But make no mistake, this is all about control, folks. They want to transform our nation into something that fits their globalist vision. They want to take away your property rights, your freedoms, and your ability to live where you choose. And they're using disasters like Hurricane Helene to fast-track their plans. Again, I'm going to hit you with an opinion warning. In my view, this administration has fully embraced globalism. It's pushed us further down this path with every crisis. But let me be clear. I don't embrace globalism. I stand for individual liberty. and for our constitutional republic, and for the rights of every American citizen to live freely without interference from those who value profit over people. Folks, this just is more about than just recovery from a storm. It's about fighting for our freedom, our property, our very way of life. We've faced disasters before and we've rebuilt stronger each time, but now we're facing a different kind of threat. And it's coming from our own government. You got to stay informed. You got to stay vigilant. And don't let these globalist agendas take root in our country. This is our land, and we're not giving it up. So back to the United Nations 2030 and 2050 goals and the hidden agenda behind carbon credits. All right, folks, buckle up. Because today we've been pulling back the curtain on something bigger than just environmentalism. The United Nations is pushing a 2030 and 2050 global diversity framework, calling for, and I quote, an increase of at least 15% in the area, connectivity, and integrity of natural ecosystems. Now, what does that mean in plain English? They want to expand natural ecosystems. And in their view, humans are not a priority. In fact, people become less important than trees, fish, or heck, even mosquitoes if they can help the ecosystem. It's extreme environmentalism. And I understand it's important, but maybe not in some of these regions. But this is all part of a larger agenda aimed at pushing humans out of certain areas, reducing our so-called impact on the environment. Another opinion warning, folks. Now, it's my opinion based on patterns we've seen that these global elites who don't care about you or your family want to push you off your land under the guise of conservation. So let me explain. Wild forest and carbon credits, the new gold rush. Here's where it gets even more alarming. When these lands are cleared of people, these folks are forced off their property. What do you think happens? Well, the land returns to wild forest status. And guess what? These forests become valuable carbon sinks, absorbing more carbon than they can produce. And in today's world of carbon credits, that land becomes money. That's right, the very land that your home used to sit on becomes a commodity for big corporations and the government to trade in a carbon exchange market. For example, let's say some trees get planted as part of a reforestation project. The carbon from those trees absorbed over time can be quantified and turned into carbon credits, which can then be sold to big corporations trying to offset their emissions. So while you lose your home, they make money off the land you once lived on. They might be mining it for quartz and lithium too. But the UN's agenda doesn't just protect nature, it turns nature into cold, hard cash for the global elite. So it's not just about, saving the trees. It's about making money, folks. They don't really care. Meanwhile, the lithium mines and government interests, hold on, that's not all. And we talked about this. The land in western North Carolina is also sitting on some incredibly valuable resources like lithium. Lithium is critical for everything from electric cars to cell phones, and it's just how happens the Department of Defense recently struck a $90 million deal to boost domestic lithium production. One of the prime targets, the Kings Mountain mining area just next door to where Hurricane Helene hit. Coincidence? We don't think so. And BlackRock, one of the world's largest investment firms, just ramped up their stake in the company that controls this lithium mines. So while they're talking about saving the environment, they're really making moves to profit off the land, your land. And I know we talked about this just a little bit ago, but in case you weren't paying attention, I had to repeat it. So out of crisis comes opportunity for some. So, folks, here's why I need you to pay attention. That's why I repeat stuff. I need you to pay attention. The state of North Carolina, the federal government, mining industries, carbon investors, academics, they're all lining up to make money off this disaster. Money. Hurricane Helene may have devastated communities, but for them, it's an opportunity. What's happening here is bigger than just a land grab. It's part of a global push that undermines our constitutional republic, our property rights, and ultimately our freedom. They're selling this as environmental progress. But what they really want is control of your land, your resources, and yes, your freedom, even your freedom to live where you want. So what can you do? First, we fight back. We make sure our voices are heard at our local, state, and federal levels. Start with your county commissioners, your state reps, your governors. Don't wait for the federal government to act. Focus on protecting your local community. This is how we preserve our individual liberties and property rights. Second, stay informed. Keep digging. Keep asking questions. Don't let the media distract you with side stories. We're talking about real lives being destroyed, real property being taken, all under the guise of progress. Folks, don't let anyone tell you that you're powerless. This is our constitutional republic. And as long as we stand united, we can push back against these globalist agendas. This isn't just about some far-off UN goals. This is happening right here in our own backyard. So let's stay vigilant, let's stay informed, and let's go right. I'll be right back with more stories. Thank you for tuning in.
Quarter of registered voters still say they don't know you. They don't know what makes you tick. And why do you think that is? What's the disconnect?
It's an election bill. And I take it seriously that I have to earn everyone's vote. This is an election for President of the United States. No one should be able to take for granted that they can just declare themselves a candidate and automatically receive support. You have to earn it. And that's what I intend to do.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to Hashtag Go Right with Peter Boykin. I know that was a lot of information, a massive information download, and I almost let that just be the podcast. But there's two other quick things that we got to go over that's important. So let's get on to it. So Kamala Harris's Call Me Daddy propaganda. Bizarre campaign move now. Let's talk about Kamala Harris, our sitting vice president, who's been on a PR blitz, desperately trying to revive her career and her image by cozying up to pop culture. She's trying to put on a riz. She recently sat down with Alex Cooper on the popular podcast, Call Me Daddy. But this isn't just any interview, it's propaganda wrapped in pop culture. For those unfamiliar, because I don't know, Call Her Daddy is a show primarily targeting young female listeners with past topics like blowjobs. Well, we know Kamala Harris is familiar with that. Hall passes and frat daddies. Hardly the platform for serious political discussion, right? Well, that's exactly why fans are outraged. This isn't an opinion. It's a fact based on viewer reactions. Fans flocked to social media, labeling the interview as propaganda and expressing their disgust. Comments flooded in saying, done. This was my fave podcast. I'm 100% disgusted. And why alienate so many of your fans? This so-called interview was a softball discussion centered around reproductive rights and abortion, sidestepping key issues like immigration and the economy. The topics that truly matter to voters in the upcoming election. And Harris chose to record this interview as Hurricane Helene was wreaking havoc across the Southeast, while Americans were seeking leadership, and the timing couldn't have been more out of touch. Now, this shift in strategy tells you one thing. Harris and her team are worried. You don't change the game plan in the fourth quarter unless you're losing. Lining up appearances on unserious shows like Call Her Daddy and the Howard Stern show. I mean, this is what desperate leadership looks like when the pressure is mounting. So let's talk about the merchant of death who's back in business. The Biden-Harris prisoner swap disaster. And now let's get into some international crisis that reveals the true danger of weak leadership. Remember Victor Bout, the notorious Russian arms dealer known as the Merchant of Death? Less than 2 years after being released in a prisoner swap for the WNBA star Brittany Griner, he's back at it. Bout has reportedly sold $10 million worth of weapons to Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen, a group actively targeting U.S. forces in the region. Now let's rewind. Bout was arrested back in 2011 for selling millions in weapons to forces targeting American soldiers. And what does this Biden-Harris administration do? They release him in exchange for a basketball player who was caught with drugs in Russia. You can't make this up. Russia played us. They knew that with their weak leaders like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they could use Griner as a pawn to free a dangerous arms dealer. This is not only emboldens our enemies, but sets up a terrible precedent with stopping other nations from taking over Americans as prisoners, knowing they can trade them for high-value assets. So that's all the news for today. We'll be right back with a hashtag #GoRightRecap.
Gonna build a mountain, yeah, 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 yeah. Gonna build a mountain from a little hill. Gonna build me a mountain, at least I hope I will. Gonna build a mountain, gonna build it high. I don't know how I'm gonna do it, I only know I'm gonna try. Gonna build me a daydream from a little hope. Gonna push that daydream up a mountain slope. Gonna build a daydream, gonna see it through. Gonna build a mountain and a daydream, gonna make them both come true. Gonna build a heaven from a little hell. Gonna build me a heaven, and I know darn well if I build my mountain with a lot of care and take my daydream up the mountain, and heaven will be waiting there when I build that heaven, as I will someday. And I'll build me a heaven as I take me away, and the Lord sends Gabriel to take me away. What a fine young son to take my place. I'll leave the sun in my heaven on earth with the good Lord's grace. With a fine young son to take my place, I'll leave the sun in my heaven on earth with the good Lord's grace. Gonna build a mountain, yeah, yeah.
Welcome back to the Go Right News Recap. So what have we learned today? We learned a whole lot about Appalachia Mountains, but we learned our constitutional republic is facing a series of challenges, from hurricanes to political distractions. Kamala Harris is spending time on pulp culture podcasts talking about blowjobs and everything else. She's ignoring the real issues voters care about. And while the merchant of death is back in business thanks to Biden-Harris's disastrous foreign policy, and as natural disasters test our resilience, there are still significant concerns about voter fraud and election integrity. But, hey, when we talk about that, that's misinformation. But there's hope. We can hold our leaders accountable. We can demand better. This is why we fight for liberty, and this is why we go right. So thank you for joining today. For more details on these stories and other breaking news, visit GoRightNews.com. Be sure to check us out on Rumble.com, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, X, and more under hashtag GoRight with Peter Boykin. And if you want to help us with Truth Flowing, you could donate via Cash App at $ Peter Boykin, the number 1, or find all the links you need on GoRightNews.com and PeterBoykin.com. So folks, stay vigilant, stay informed, and always remember, we are the Republic. Let's keep it that way. Peace. God bless.
The View, probably the worst broadcast in the history of broadcasts, has just ended Kamala Harris's campaign. Another reason why they don't want her doing any interviews. Another reason why she hasn't done a single live press conference. Another reason why she flip-flops on every single issue. Watch this.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Well, I'm in constant contact with her. She's aware we're singing from the same song sheet. She helped pass all the laws that are being employed now. She was a major player in everything we've done, including passage of legislation which we were told we could never pass. And so she's been, and her staff is interlocked with mine in terms of all the things we're doing.
Nothing comes to mind? Nothing comes to mind, cackling Kamala, comrade, phony in chief? Are you effing kidding me? Nothing comes to mind on what you would do differently in the past 4 years? Nothing comes to mind. The entire world is in absolute chaos. You've given over $200 billion to Ukraine to fight a forever war where American soldiers have died, where I can't even tell, countless Russians and Ukrainians have died, families displaced. Every single military specialist, every single military expert has concluded that there is no way that Ukraine has any shot at winning this war. Nothing comes to mind, Kamala? The Middle East is in absolute chaos. It hasn't seen this amount of bedlam and unrest since World War II. Israel is fighting a 7-front war. Iran is threatening nuclear attacks after firing 200 ballistic missiles at populous cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa. Nothing comes to mind. We have literally, the facts cannot be denied, the worst border crisis in the history of our country. You went on 60 Minutes and even Bill Whitaker, to just try to save a molecule of ethos and credibility, pushed back on you and say, how could you allow this many people to come in? Wouldn't you do something different? And you gave your same empty vessel, empty shell, empty-headed word salad nothingness.